whether it's start a business, whether
Right.
it's for marriage, for
Right.
salvation of our children.
First thing I did, Michael, I built God's house. Then I said, if I pay off God's house, He'll pay off my house.
Okay.
You see, because the seed reproduces after its kind.
Okay.
Naturally, you want your church to grow. And that's a fact. It has to grow. So I tell people all the time, you know, find out what the church is doing. Get involved in it. You may have to, in a sense, set yourself aside, but you're really not. God is saying, that man loves my work or that woman loves my work more than they love their own house. You know, they want to do something for me, and God sends them ministering angels. I love that. Well, and it goes
That's
down, and He
awesome.
said, because they've blessed my house. Go bless their house. Ladies and gentlemen, I've been debt-free since 1982.
Praise God.
That's a long time. So I buy my houses cash. You know, I buy my cars cash. People say, how can you do that? Because I put God first in my life. I built this before I built that. But you know what? I didn't have to wait long. I was in the middle of building this, and God said, hey, man, I can do two things at one time.
So what
He
you're
built
saying?
mine.
So what you're saying? You're talking to the pediatrician.
That's
you're talking
right.
to the school teacher.
Oh, yes, sir.
You're talking to the person who, man, pouring concrete. Hey, let's build God's house
Right.
together, and then God will continue the blessings in their house.
Well, you can't send your children to school if they got a building to go into, right?
Right, exactly.
In other words, the school has to be built for your child to be educated. Now, you can call it, well, we homeschool. Well, you still
Right.
got to have a place at home before you can school them.
Right.
You see, I find a lot of times, a lot of guys, they want to bless themselves. I've learned I'm going to bless God. When I bless God, God blesses me. And now, ladies and gentlemen, without sounding prideful or arrogant, my Lord, before I even say it, it comes to pass. Even before, God said, I heard you thinking. You see what I'm saying? And as a man thinking in his heart, so is he. Now, where does God reside in people's lives? In their heart. So when you're thinking in your heart, you're thinking the thoughts of God.
Now, here's another great challenge. At the end of that 12th verse, it says, imitate. Imitate others who have, or actually, I think it says inherit
Right.
what has been promised.
Right.
So inherit is present tense.
Sure.
That you're getting what God has promised you. And so Mike Jones, Tanya Jones, the Village of Faith,
Right.
Pastor Steve, and New Destiny, we're to imitate
Right.
you.
I
How
understand.
do we imitate you when, man, you're talking about putting satellites in the sky,
yeah.
man. You're talking about it. How does the person who may have not, you know, they may not have built something that
Right.
great
I
or
understand.
looking to do something for whatever reason that great, how do they then still imitate
Okay.
a Jesse Duplantis, a Steve Allen, a Michael Jones? How do they do that?
You don't imitate what I build.
Okay.
You imitate what I do.
Okay.
You see what I'm saying? Because God's no respecter of person. Some people say, well, this ministry is bigger than mine, but I'm not trying to find out how so I can get bigger than them. I said, how did they do what God told them to do? Now, God may not have called me to do what they're doing, but He called me to do something else. So it's so wonderful, you see. I tell people all the time, I said, I've had pastors say, I want to build a church. I said, what are you telling me for? I said, he said, well, you know, you've built a church. Yes. I said, but you may want to build a bigger church than mine. Because, you see, I have a worldwide ministry. I'm a traveling ministry. I travel most of the time. I had a guy one time criticize the aircraft. And I thought, And I was thinking, how do I answer this fella because of my plane? And we were flying to Rod Parsley's to preach his camp meeting.
Right.
And Kathy, my wife, was on. She said, Jesse, can I ask you something? I said, yeah. She don't know God's speaking this, and I'm trying to figure out what to say to this gentleman, you know, because I knew I had to answer this person. She said, how much money you think Rod Parsley spent building all these buildings? I said, well, this is many, many years ago. I said, well, at least $20 million. And then she said this, and it went off of me like a shotgun, ladies and gentlemen. He said, it takes Pastor Rod Parsley $20 million to preach to his church every Sunday. He said, because that's what he needs to preach to his church. He said, your church is this plane. Your church is the world. You need $20 million to buy this plane. Do you see? It's all relative, see? So when you see what I have, you can go way further than what I have. Now, my spiritual son, Steve Allen, is going to do bigger than what I do. Why? Because I wouldn't be much of a father to him if he didn't build bigger than me. Now, you hear people say, oh, no, because you see, everything I got, I have to place in him. Now, he has what he has in him, and he has what I have in him. It's got to get bigger, which is going to make me shout, Lord, God, why? Because I am producing what the Lord said to do. Every man's work must be a continuation. You see what I'm saying? So the work that God's called you, the Village of Faith, God's called you to do. Ladies and gentlemen, God is my witness. God's anointed this man. All you got to do is say, you know what? I have an example. You can call me an example. You can call Steve Allen an example. That's wonderful. But my Lord, Virginia is not Louisiana. So what happens is God's told you to do something, see? So what happens is, yeah, you can look at it and say, boy, they're doing this. We can do that too. That's true. But you'll probably do it in a way that me and Steve never thought we could do. And that's a wonderful thing.
My goodness. Tell me, where did it begin for you? I've shared this with you personally, that when I wasn't serious about the Lord, and just getting into the church for the first time, there were some people in Arizona that said, look, there's this guy, this white-haired guy, you know, he's on TV and he sounds just like Richard Pryor. And I love Richard Pryor at the time.
I love Richard Pryor. I'm a funny man.
And so I said, let me check this guy out. And honestly, before I listened to anyone else, you were one of the first preachers on television that I listened to, simply because, one, you're funny and it was just relevant, and you really just, the Spirit was speaking to me. Where did faith begin for you? You have a wonderful testimony about how God has transitioned you.
First thing first, when God spoke to me, he said, I want you to go on worldwide television. First thing I think, my God, I ain't got enough money to get out of town. Hey, I'm going to get on worldwide television. And the Lord said, I didn't ask you to pay for it. I ask you to believe for it. So I realized you first find and focus on what God said. All the other things begin to come in. See, the problem with most ministers, to get their vision, they're focusing on the things to bring it in when they should be focusing on the vision. As you focus on the vision will tell you how to bring the things in.
Right.
Ladies and gentlemen, listen to me. I started just like that. I said, well, you know what? If Kenneth Copeland can be on television, why can't I? If Charles Stanley can be on television, why can't I? If Billy Graham can be on television, why can't I? If Billy Graham can rent a stadium, why can't I? And the Lord says, why can't you? See, I was limiting myself because of someone else's ministry. I know I will never compete. I'm not in competition with no ministry. I'm in cooperation with every one of them. But I made up my mind. Wait a minute. You know, I'm not chopped liver. Neither are you.
Right.
You can do what God tells you to do. And don't worry about no recession. Have you noticed, Michael, since the recession been going on, God hasn't stopped telling you to build?
No.
God hasn't stopped telling you to, you know what? Because he don't know there is a recession. So why we should even talk to him about a recession?
You know, this is the greatest time, I feel, to be the church. And for me, this is really the Mount Carmel for Christians.
Right.
Either God is going to show up and deal with this recession for his children and provide, or else let's find another God to go and worship.
That's correct.
I believe that God has been, is, and will continue to provide for his children. I just believe
there's
that
no
in my
other
heart.
choice in the matter. I never say this. You'll find me, you never hear me say, well, God gonna do this and God gonna. Well, when? Gona is a long time. I don't even know where the city of Gona is.
Right. This is in the Old Testament.
Yes. I said, Lord, I done crossed that chapter. I'm in the red parts. You know what I'm saying? I said, God, they said, when are you going to get that? So, but just you believe in God for this thing, yeah? When do you have it? Already have it. What do you mean you already have it? The evidence of it is not seen. But what happens when you get it? Well, that's just manifestation.
Right.
So I'm dealing with faith. See, faith not only takes the things out of the unseen world and brings them into the seen, what it does, while it's bringing something into the seen, the residue of it is working on something else that God has already spoken to your faith to do, and then when he reveals it to you, it begins to manifest. And all of a sudden, well, right now I'm in the middle of all kinds of things. God told me this about, in January, he said, do everything all at one time.
Right.
I said, what'd you say, Jesus? First thing you think of, well, that's going to cost a lot of money. He said, I'm not broke. He said, my streets are not gold-plated. He said, I'd give you green feet walking on that. He said, they solid gold. Just I'm not broke. He said, no, I don't want you broke. Then I realized that, wait a minute. I'm limiting myself by what other people said, what other people think. I'm going to say what God says.
And that's awesome. That's awesome. I've heard you heard others say, the best thing that we can do to assist the poor is to not be poor. Right. I was watching a piece on television the other night, and some young children were in Africa, and the one thing that brought tears to their eyes, they were from New York, the one thing that brought tears to their eyes is that they couldn't help those children more.
Isn't that sad?
And I believe that's the cause of Christians today. How many people can we assist before we go to heaven? How many people can I bless? How many people can I heal? How many people can I help
answer all that.
Until we get to heaven?
I can answer that. In 2 Corinthians, he said, and God is able to make all grace abound toward you, that you always, I like that word always, having all sufficiency, not a portion, all sufficiency in all things. Here's the key. may abound to every good work. You know, when Hurricane Katrina hit New Orleans a few years ago, I'll never forget, we came here, we were on the edge of devastation, but we were not devastated. We opened up Covenant Compassion Center. We met every need in this community. Now, that is not an overstatement. Spiritually, physically, financially, we met that need and still had everything over. Now, before I got to that point, I remember there were so many people asking for help, and I said, God,